but I'll try to keep a decent pace and fast at times. So I'm a UX engineer, and I consider myself more of a generalist. I know some people focus mainly on research or mainly on design, but throughout my experience in UX, I've always been doing both sides. I didn't always do the design and research for the same project. Sometimes I would research one project and design another project so that we could make sure that when we tested a design, we weren't biased towards our own designs. But I do like both sides because I'm sort of an introverted extrovert. So I have my moments when I really like to hide behind my computer and not to really talk to too many people and just be able to work on a design and get lost in the puzzle of it. Or yeah, but other times I really enjoy going out and talking to people. And so it kind of fits both sides of my personality. I've worked in various different environments. I started with a startup in California for enterprise application integration software, so it was quite techy. Our user groups were mainly engineers and product managers, and the team was kind of like, they like to hire a bunch of all-star people, so the best of everything. So all of our developers thought they were the best developers you could ever find, and they made sort of an interesting experience. I also worked for a big, huge medical publisher. So if you know, read Elsevier. And that one was, again, a different personality, a huge company that's dispersed across, well, all around the world. And things tended to move slow there compared to the startup. And they definitely had a lot of like habits in play and different things that they were used to doing. And so when UX came in, it kind of shook some things up at times. Also an advertising agency. So there, it was all types of different products. And a lot of them would come in really fast for big companies, small companies. We did a lot of charity work as well. And then I've been a consultant too. And then again, I am a fast talker. I'm American, as I'm sure you can hear. And the more excited I get, especially when telling stories, the faster I get. So if my English gets too fast and you need me to slow down, I know that Zoom has the hand waving function, or you feel free to unmute yourself and ask me to please slow down. But I will try to keep a nice pace. Okay, so when I first started as a UX person, I'll take back one little step. I originally went into IT as a developer, and I only worked in development for about 6 months before I realized that this tiny little class I had during an exchange program, I went to Scotland for a year, and I had this UX class. And then I came back to my computer science degree and kept telling everybody about UX, what UX was and why we needed it. And they didn't know what I was talking about, and they just wanted to look at their mathematics and their computer science. But I couldn't get it out of my head. And then I worked as a developer for 6 months. And the whole time I was there, I couldn't believe that the company didn't have someone for UX. And it really bugged me. And so I went back and got my master's degree in UX and, well, changed careers. Still in IT, but new field, obviously. So I had this vision of everybody in the company being so glad that they would have this person who could go out and talk to the users and could explain everything to them and help guide them so that they didn't make mistakes, and that it would save so much time in development. And I definitely had my rose-colored glasses on. I was expecting a perfect world, I guess, when I came out. And my first project was with the startup in California, and it was a bit of a dream team. They had handpicked everybody, and they said, this is going to be a new product to include in our product suite. It's going to be very exciting, and what we want to make sure that you all get it just right. And so they put us in a room, and they basically said, talk about how the product should work, come up with some designs, get all the documentation together, and then we'll get it developed. So one thing, you know, fresh out of university that confused me, as a UX person, I wasn't allowed to talk to users because this was a secret project, and I wasn't allowed to let anybody know that we were working on it. So I'm straight out of university guessing what my brand new user group would be doing. And luckily the user groups was actually development. So I thought, well, at least I was a developer for a while, so I have some background and maybe this will work. Our main UI developer, everybody was just in love with him. He actually worked for NASA. We used to joke that he was a genuine rocket scientist. This guy was going to transform the team. He was going to build the best product ever. All we had to do was give him the ideas, come up with things as a group, and then pass it on to him, and this magical piece of software was going to come out. So we did that. We worked in the team. We had all kinds of fun games to try to come up with we'd brainstorm different ways for the product to work. It was quite a technical product. It was the enterprise application integration software. So the idea was we had a bunch of data in the background that was being transformed and moved between different pieces of software. And we wanted to be able to put it into a simple website for a product manager to be able to monitor what's going on with the data. And so basically the user had to be able to mine through a bunch of data and transform it from one type of stored format to another type of stored format, and then drop it on the screen, all in the simplest way possible. So we mocked up a bunch of designs, we talked about it, we haggled over things, came up with a design that we thought was all a great starting spot. We could get it released and then take it out testing and see how it worked. And so we put it all together and we handed it over to our rocket scientist. And then we waited because, well, at least for me, it was my first project, and you know, I thought everything was going smoothly and beautifully. And then we saw what actually came out, and it was a bit of a wake-up call. Our UI developer, even our fancy rocket scientist, decided he knew better than all of us, because again, this company hired the best of the best. So they all thought that they knew everything. And he developed his own thing. His product looked absolutely nothing like anything the team had designed. It was an absolute disaster. The product manager got demoted. It was a bit of a shock. We went from a product that tried to guide the user to a product that was basically the most tabs I've ever seen on one interface in my life. We had tabs within tabs within tabs, and in some cases we had tabs and tabs with groups of tabs on either side and groups of tabs in the middle. And you had to know which tab to go to get which piece of data to connect to another piece of data to connect it to the screen, to the website that the user was supposed to be developing. I did finally get to do some user testing, but not with actual users. We did it in-house. So our product, we had a huge suite with about 7 different products, and I was allowed to test with website developers from other products. So that way, at least they knew kind of what they were trying to do, but they also knew our product so well in general that they weren't proper users. They knew the back end and they knew a bunch of tricks. But I remember user after user failing and being unable to complete any task in this interface because it was so horrible. And then one user, he actually stopped for a second, pushed his chair back, scratched his head, tilted it, and said, "Oh my God, I know what happened. This design shows exactly what the back-end architecture is." He said, "I would never do that to a user." And it was this project that made me realize, as much as I thought my product team was going to love having me there, that doesn't mean that they actually will. Or even if they enjoy having me on the team, it doesn't mean that they're going to follow the information that I get them, that it was actually a lot more work than expected. So instead of having just one user, I had 2. So, yep, my reality, I realized at this point that I needed to check in with the team. Yeah, and like I said before, not everyone believes in us, and that we need to learn more about the team. So basically, I started looking at my team as another user group. So I basically had 2 user groups, and I'm like I'm the designer in the middle. So I have my end users that are actually using the products that I'm working on. But then I actually have my team, and they're users as well, because they're users of the information that we're giving to them. And the different team members tended to have different types of personalities. And in my mind, I thought of them, you know, as different personas. So rather than just creating a persona for the user group, in my mind, I'd also have different personality types that I work with within my groups, and I would try to find ways that I could make it easier for them and for me to work together so that we could understand each other and respect each other's work a bit better. Okay, so I thought for fun, go through some of the different personalities that I worked with, what their needs and wants are, and ways I found to actually work through their personality type. So one of my first personalities I worked with in my second company was a UI developer, and he was older. He'd been working with this company for a lot longer than I had. He'd been there for years and years, and most of his career was before they had any UX people. So he was used to being told what the product's supposed to do and working on the UI design and not having anybody get involved, and then everybody just loving what he handed them in the end. He loved to hang out and have coffee and pizza with the team. He was kind of old-fashioned but he liked being part of the group and just kind of watching everybody and sort of sitting on the sidelines. But when you talk to him about the products, especially once I was there, he was grumpy a lot, and he would fight over everything that we told him. He'd complain about the tiniest detail in every single product, and he would drive me crazy because I would try so hard to find ways to communicate with him, and he was just grumpy all the time. And then one day I was talking with him, and he just got really frustrated, and he said, "You took all the fun part of my job away." And I kind of stopped and thought, oh my God, I did. All these things that I love to do when I'm working on the design, thinking about the user's walkthrough, and when I'm thinking about all the different pieces they have to fit together, and you're fitting them together like a puzzle and putting your design together. Those were the parts of his job that he absolutely adored. And I came along, or the UX came along, and we took that and built this. And all the creativity was gone from his side, and he was basically just became somebody who was recreating something from a page and didn't get to put any of the puzzle pieces together, and he just wasn't having any fun anymore. And so basically, I changed the way I interacted with him. I would start to hang out at his desk more often, you know, bring my cup of coffee over to him basically, and chat with him and say, you know, we've got this thing coming up and it's got all these pieces, and I'm thinking that it can kind of go together like this. What do you think? And he'd say, yeah, I had a similar thought. And he'd say, but I thought it would be really nice if we could include this little piece over here. And I would take note of his suggestions, and I would really try to think, you know, these ideas that he has, we can put them into designs and we can test them and see how they come out. And then I would let him know how they did. And if there's always pieces within the design where there are little bits that it's just more about taste, you know? It's not necessarily a usability issue or a huge one. I would go to him for those little things and say, you know, I was thinking we could do this or this. Do you have a preference? Which one did you like? And he would tell me, and he would get so excited, and he would give me a lot of feedback. And then when I would tell him how the users responded to his ideas, he was very enthusiastic. And it actually became one of the nice members of the team to work with, because he realized that I wasn't trying to just tell him what to do. I was just bringing information from the user and putting it on the page, but that I also kept, by keeping him involved, he felt like he had some kind of, he had his fingers in the design. It wasn't just that I was handing him some boring framework that he had to recreate. He had some stock in it. He was enthusiastic about it again. He stopped complaining about everything I gave him. He started doing things with a smile. And if he had a question about the design, he'd come and talk to me about it instead of just making things up. Really, really nice, because it completely changed our interaction. And I think that's something that, especially when you're working for a company where they don't have a lot of UX or haven't had a lot of UX, to keep that in mind, that the parts that we love about our job, someone else loved it before we got there. So having a little empathy towards our team can go a long way. Oops. Okay. So back to my first company again. I had a lot of developers that I worked with that, again, like the rocket scientists, felt like they knew everything about the design. It was actually really hard to get changes into the product. You know, we would gather user information, because at this point, if it was an existing product, we were allowed to talk to users. And so we would have all this data, and we would take it to the team and we would say, oh, we need to make this change and this change and this change. And a lot of times developers would be like, no, I built this. This is perfect. There's no reason to change this. And they were very clever, and they just thought that they knew everything about the product, and therefore there was no reason to change anything because they know how to use it. So why wouldn't the user figure out how to use it? And then they designed it or were part of the design, and therefore it's perfect already, so we're not going to put any changes in. And that made it really, really hard when we would have small changes, especially, that we wanted to put in, because it wasn't worth the time of the developer. They couldn't be bothered with the little fixes. The little fixes didn't mean anything. It's just little piddly things, and who cares anyways? I would much rather be working on this big product over here and all these really exciting things that are going on in another part of the product. And so I would run into a lot of little fights where somebody would say, oh, we can't put that in there anyways, it's not possible. And it didn't matter how small the change was or how needed the change was. It just simply wasn't something that we wanted to do, or that they wanted to do. I even had an argument at one point with the team, or developer, about putting a password reminder on the product, because they just simply didn't want to do it. There were other other features that were more exciting, and the user should know their password anyways. And I couldn't believe that I was arguing over a password reminder. But you know, these things happen. So when working with this type of personality, I would, again, empathy always. You know, we have empathy for our users when they have struggles using our products. So we need to have empathy for our team as well. You know, I'd acknowledge the little fixes, and I'd say, I know it's kind of, you know, I know that you have this other thing you really want to work on. I'm excited about that project as well. I can't wait to see how it comes out. But, you know, we have this thing and it's really driving our users crazy. And then I would say, you know, we talked to 10 users and all 10 of them said that they know it's a minor change, but it would make their lives so much easier. Can we please put it in there? And I would, you know, try to boost up their ego a little bit, let them know how amazing they were. And, you know, you're so good at this stuff. You can probably get it done in no time. And then when I felt like sometimes they would think, well, you're just UX. You don't really know anything anyways. You're just talking to the user. You're more foo-foo, like foo-foo stuff, not really the meat of the product. And I would, because I had a history in development, sometimes I could see how easy it would be to fix the bug. And so I would tell them, you know, well, really, that's hard. All you have to do is this. So I had a silly little thing where a user wanted to change some data on a page, and the developer said we couldn't do it because he wouldn't know which field they had changed. And I know that that wasn't true. And I also knew he just simply didn't want to edit the page. And so I said, well, you know, couldn't you just save everything on the page, even if they hadn't changed? I mean, if they haven't changed the data on the page and you saved it, it's not going to do anything bad. And then he realized he couldn't just tell me something wasn't possible and walk away. And then if it was a bigger product, because I know that was just a tiny change, if it was a bigger problem, I would had some friends who were in the company, and I would go to them and show them the page and say, I'm told that this isn't possible to change. What can you tell me? And they would give me just enough information to take back to the developer and say, well, have you tried doing this, or have you looked here? And I found a lot of times that I didn't get as much pushback because it was easier to go ahead and change it than argue with me at that point. And then, you know, when they would make the change, I'd make such a big deal about it and say, oh, thank you, thank you, thank you. I saw that you changed this and it's going to really make people's lives happier. And yeah, it boosted their ego a bit, but also let them know that they couldn't just walk all over me. And so I found when working with this type of personality, when they really are just more interested in in doing the more complicated things and not interested in all these other things that you in UX were always asking for. That, you know, yeah, you teach them, you work with them empathetically, you give them the data, and you show them they can't walk all over you. I know, I mean, a lot of these things, they feel like simple common sense things, but I think when we're lost in the heat of the moment and we're just frustrated with these same personalities that we're dealing with over and over and over again, sometimes it's hard to stop and just think about what it is that we can do to make our lives easier when interacting with people. I mean, we're so focused on our end users that we forget about the teams. Okay, so this particular person that personality type, we had a lot of in the larger company. And because it was a medical publishing company, we hired a lot of ex-doctors and nurses to work within the company because they were really good at knowing what was going on in the hospitals. They knew when things were missing. They knew the types of language that was involved, because medical is quite a special career field. And so we ended up with a lot of people that were previously the user. So you have an ex-doctor working on MD Consult, you know, working on a website just to help doctors research, or you have a nurse working specifically on the nursing research information website. It was, we ran into so many situations where the user we'd go talk to users and we get information, we come back and tell the team, well, the users are saying this, and the team would say, well, no, I used to be that user. Maybe it's like that where they worked, but in general, that's not how it works. And the thing is, a lot of these team members had been out of their career field for, you know, 5-10 years. And 5 to 10 years out of the hospital, where they had gone from basically always interacting with the patient to having to interact more with computers and the patient at the same time, things changed. The way that the doctors and nurses interacted with people was very different. The way they researched information was very different than it was 10 years before. And this was really hard to get that message across because they loved their users so much. They used to be their user. And they didn't know, they couldn't get past the visions of what happened when they used to be in the field. Because they really just, they believed that they knew so much that the information we got wasn't correct. So my goal was always to get them to attend user interviews, as we always do. But even, you know, especially if it was at the hospital versus bringing someone into the office. And I would do that by saying, you know, there's this great ice cream place. We can go and do the interviews, go get some ice cream, and then go back and do some more interviews. And so basically I would bribe them as much as possible and try to get them in front of their user group, because they needed to see what had changed. And so one of the things that, again, empathy as always, is this wasn't a case of me saying, you don't understand your user, you don't care about the user. I know that you know the problems that nurses have when they're in a hospital and they don't have time and they're tired. And I know that you're trying so hard to get them what they need to do their job better. And making sure that they know that. And then asking questions about, what was it that was your biggest struggle when you were in the hospital? And I would say, you know, that's interesting. Nurses still talk about that now. And they also say, because of the way things have changed in the last 2 years, now they have this other problem. And I would try to introduce it in a way that, that guided them from their problems as that user group into what's happening now, to sort of update them on what's changing in the career field. I would make sure they were there for the interviews, like I said, as much as possible. And then I would give them data. Lots and lots and lots of data. One of the things I did with this user group specifically is I found that they wouldn't necessarily read the full reports that came back from the user sessions, because they would see a couple things they recognized, decide they knew everything, maybe skim it, but I couldn't really get them to pay close attention to the issues that we were having or the needs that users had. And so I don't know how many of you have used Affinity Diagrams. Basically, I said infinity, sorry, typo there, Affinity Diagram. So basically, when you're gathering data for a test, when you do it in person, you would have a ton of sticky notes, and you'd write, rather than filling out a piece of paper, your interview script with all of the data that you gather, you would put all of the data on individual sticky notes. So every time a new point was brought up in a session, you write it on a sticky note. And then after each user, you go out and you have a huge tree or multiple trees on the walls in a room nearby. And you literally stack the sticky notes. So if, for example, the needing a password reminder function, every time someone mentioned that, I would put it on a sticky note, and then I would put it on top of the stack of every other user that said that they also needed a password reminder, so that when the team would come in, they could look at the thickest sticky notes, and it wasn't just me saying 90% of users said this. They would see a huge stack for an individual problem or an individual request, and it made it easier to sort of soak up the data that's coming from the user interview rather than having to read a report. The issue with this particular team was they were not all located in the same office, so I couldn't bring them into a room and show them all these sticky notes all over the walls and have them see the data grow as the user interviews were actually occurring. And so I created a way in PowerPoint to have the same concept. So every time someone gave me feedback on a particular item, I would make the outline of a square darker and thicker and eventually turn it red, so that rather than them going through a report and actually having to read, they could just scan a tree of information on a PowerPoint slide, and their eyes were automatically drawn to these super important points. And then on there it would say how many users said it, 9 out of 10 users brought this up or whatever. And it gave them, it was a much easier way for them to digest the data that I gave them. And it also helped point out the differences between what they were expecting when they were actually the user versus what was really happening in the field. And those types of diagrams also help with other members of the team, but I felt like it worked especially well for this particular type of team member because they were so ingrained in their views on how the world worked for their user. The goal was to kind of shock them out of it, to draw their eye to something important and have them go, oh, really? I didn't fully understand that that's what was going on. So basically what happened is I started in these meetings, rather than, especially with certain team members that had fought me a lot, when I would say, well, users say this, and they would say, oh no, users aren't gonna do that. That's not what we used to do. They would start saying, well, I used to do this, but Tammie, what do they say now? What's changed? Is this different than when I used to work? What does the user data say? And it made my life so much easier, and I stopped having to create those big diagrams, which were quite time consuming. But it was worth it for the end product of being able to go into a meeting and just have the team members actually ask me what the data was instead of arguing with me and telling me what they thought the data would be. Okay. So you can also consider a whole team, because you've got personas and individual people that you interact with, but also teams have their own dynamics. You can kind of lump them together as certain types of teams that you interact with. Now, I will say from my side, my experience at member that was hired to be part of a team specifically within the the company, I was always part of a UX group that worked almost like a consultancy for the individual product teams. So looking at it from that point of view, even though at times I was a team member, at times it really felt like sometimes I wasn't as embedded in the team as I would have been if I'd have been hired and my boss had been the product manager too. Because as it was, I was always under the shield of UX. And so it sometimes did change the way I interacted with teams. So sometimes I would be assigned to a team, and the team, it was the kind of team that when you looked at it from the outside, you thought, oh, I want to be part of their team. You know, they've been working together so well and for so long that everything just runs smoothly. They could almost read each other's minds. They worked together beautifully. They knew exactly what they needed to do in their product. And really, they thought, you know, you have this UX person. Yeah, you're kind of fun. You can out with us sometimes. But we really want you to just come and stamp it and say, yep, I agree with what you're doing. All is well. You guys are an awesome team. Everybody says you're an awesome team, and just keep doing things the way you're doing. They would get together. They do team bonding all the time. They really were more friends than a team. But what this meant is when you had information they didn't want to hear, it made them feel like maybe they weren't as good of a team as they expected, or you're the outsider and they don't want to take that advice anyways. So in these cases, it's not really that they're being mean about anything. It's just that they kind of have their own little bubble, and you have to work your way into the bubble so that you can be accepted, and get them to really pay attention to what you're suggesting. And so with these types of teams, I like to do a what is UX, and I know, you know, these types of presentations usually have the same type of information. What is UX? What is the best place to put UX? Where do we fit in the cycle? How do we interact with you? What types of deliverables will we offer you? Why is it important to have us? What types of career fields do we come from? You know, UX people tend to come from all types of areas before they find their home in our world. And they would shake their heads and be like, yeah, we know all this, and can you just give us our little stamp and let us go? And so I would include some type of exercise in it where they can be their amazing dream team. They can work together and come up with a design in the presentation. And I had enough information about the design that they were creating that I could basically use the shock factor. So one of my favorites was, it's an older study. I read it years ago, but it's still relevant for today. So basically a team at a university had a project where they were going to design a tablet for a 10-year-old girl. And this was back in the early days when there weren't as many electronics for kids. Because yeah, it's been a little while since I was at university. And but what's great is you can even do this now, and you start asking people, okay, you're going to design a tablet for a little girl. What should it include? What should it have? And I would get a whiteboard, and we'd start a brainstorming activity, just like we would at the beginning of a project. And typically you would hear, oh, well, it's got to be cute. Maybe it has a pink cover. Maybe the pink cover has glitter on it. Maybe it has cute sound effects. Oh, it's got to have a camera on it. You know, and they start listing features, and they start talking about all these things, and they're quite stereotypically doing what a lot of people would think of if they were creating a product for a young girl. Some of them even said furry covers so that they can play with it like a stuffed animal and hug it. They had all kinds of different ideas. And I would write down everything and tell them how amazing they were and how great they were at working together to come up with this concept. And then I would say, a team actually did this. And they did exactly like you did. They came up with the same design, and I would describe what the design was that the team came up with. And then I would say, and then they took it out to the users. And the kids looked at it and said, I don't want that. Why would I want that? I want something that's cool and slick and black and looks like I got it from my mom and dad. I want it to look modern, and I want it to look like it's super powerful. And basically they, the kids told the designers that most everything in their design was wrong. What they wanted was something that was not what you'd expect the stereotypical user group to want. They wanted something that was more, that was that really matched, that made them feel more grown up if they're going to have something that was so grown up. And it was wonderful watching the faces on the team when you tell them this, because they would kind of have this, oh crap, we thought we knew and we didn't know moment. And that helped a lot for them to start respecting getting user data. And especially the more data they got from their own products that kind of surprised them and wasn't what they were expecting, it made it a lot easier to work the way into the team, and made it easier for them to accept the designs and any suggestions that were made. And so with these teams as well, I would, just to keep the thoughts of UX always on their mind and to make it more memorable, before they would get caught in their old habits of just going back into the world of coming up with their own designs, I would try to do things that will stick with them. So providing research in a way that can be remembered. So the affinity diagrams on the wall where they can remember the big stacks of paper. Or creating personas. But our personas, I would make sure always had a silly trait. I don't know if you noticed, but on each one I provided something about the individual persona that I was suggesting. So the super clever engineer was the best at pinball. The UI developer who was kind of old school loved pizza. I always try to include some type of silly, memorable trait. And that way it makes the persona more human and also makes it more memorable. I remember hearing about this in a game design conference, and the presenter was saying that he was working on a team where they were designing an interface for buses, and well, for users to buy tickets for buses. And one of his users that he created was Ebenezer Scrooge, specifically the elderly customer who didn't want to pay for any more stops than he needed to get where he was going, because he didn't have a pass. He wasn't going to get a yearly pass. He just wanted to buy, if he was going 2 stops, he only wanted to pay for 2 stops. So the interface had to show him that he wasn't overpaying, that it was getting him directly to his stop. Or, another user that he talked about, he said he was working on a product with children. And so his characters were cartoon characters that people knew, like Bart Simpson. And that way, when the team talked about the personas in the team meetings, it wasn't just like they were talking about this random user and this random persona that they got them confused. Bart Simpson had a very specific personality type. Ebenezer Scrooge had a very specific personality type. This isn't always possible with every user group that we work with, but I find that adding some silly trait was enough sometimes to make the persona a little bit more memorable, so that they would bring them more into the conversation when talking about the product. And then I would also use as many videos and quotes from the user data, user sessions, to stick with the team. So if a user was really, really frustrated to the point where they just stepped back and started ranting, I made sure those moments were shown to the team. They weren't always the most important as far as being the types of changes that we wanted to put into the product, but it was important for them to see the frustrations that the users had, even if it was over something tiny. And just making them aware, like, oh yes, we need to put this feature, this change to the feature in. And they say, oh, it's not that big of a deal. I was like, well, but remember that one user and how mad she got over this teeny tiny thing that we thought wasn't a big deal. If we can keep the users from having that level of frustration, they're more likely to use our products more often. So yeah, just with that team, it was always about, it wasn't like they didn't want to participate. They needed a little bit of a push. Okay. And then there's always the aggressive team. I'm coming into the product. They're not wanting to work with UX. They're fine on their own. I think everything's just fine. They'd rather work on new stuff because you get more attention from higher ups when you have new products and new features you do than when you go back and you change things, because it just doesn't look like you're doing as much. And so it's important to them to want to just chug on. And so anything that gets in their way, they're like, get out of the way. We have our own things to do. They want to implement whatever they want to implement because they know what they're doing and they want to be able to have their little checklist and check off as much stuff as possible. So that they can work out their stress and they can talk about all the things that they need to do to keep chugging along. And with these teams, and I do try to do this a lot with other ones as well, but especially with these, I use a spoonful of sugar, like from Mary Poppins. So I would fit the advice in between nice things. So compliment them. Oh, you've done a great work on this product. People are so excited about it. You know, about the next things that you bring out. And doing that, it sort of brought down their defenses a little bit. So they weren't as likely to push back. They didn't have a chance to get into their aggressive boxing mode because you've made them happy. You slip in the advice before they have a chance to come down from that happiness, and then you end with something happy again. And so it kind of balances them out, and it makes the interactions go a little bit smoother. Because they needed something they couldn't really argue against. And so one of the little games I like to use sometimes, with these teams, it was usually a matter of the team wanting to implement something that just didn't make sense. So they had a feature they really, really, really wanted to add, and all the users' data said we should not add this feature, or it just wasn't as important. But they thought it would look cool to the higher ups if they get this feature in there, because it's just one of those that they thought would get people excited or make their product look better. So there's two ways that I typically deal with that type of situation. One of them is a Monopoly game. So at the end of a user session, I create a poster that's like a board game, and it would have a variety of features. So I would have a little screenshot that I created of a mock-up of the design for that feature. And I would walk through each feature and give a high-level view of what the feature is, and let the user ask questions. And usually they would, because they knew the product well enough or knew the area well enough, and with these teams, it would click really fast what it was that we were offering. And then I would give them money. So rather than saying, how is this feature, would you like it? And then saying yes or no or whatever. And a lot of times users will say yes to almost every feature, just because why not? The more stuff, the better. And it's fun to have all these new things. But when you give them money, when they have a stack of bills, they're very different in the way that they choose their features, because then it's not a matter of, do you want it yes or no, and I can have all of them. It's, I have limited resources and I have to pay for the features that I want. And what I would find is a lot of times they would put all the money on the one feature that would change their life, or they would split it between 3 and all the other ones would disappear. So rather than saying, yes, I want 9 out of 10 features, that you would really hone in on the ones that they wanted the most. And then I could make a graph that would show the name of every feature and the money spent on it throughout the entire sessions. So they could see, I would say, and feature A had $0. Feature B had $5,000, and 4 out of 5 users said it was the most important feature. So this even gives you a different level of feedback than having the users rank the features, because they really are showing which ones are more important to them. And this was one of the things that really got through to these teams that were wanting to build things that they didn't really need, because they could see, oh my gosh, people didn't want this feature at all. They didn't put any money in it at all, but this other thing that we didn't think was important, it took the pressure off of me telling them what users wanted, because basically they were able to see specifically what the users would be willing to pay for, and that made a big difference. Another one would be use a method like the Kano method, which is great when you have large amounts of data that you need to go through and a lot of features that you need to go through. But what's great, you say, what is it like when this feature is included in the product, and the user rates it from 1 to 10, and then, or I think it was 1 to 5. It's been a little while since I've implemented it. And then you ask the exact same question, but the opposite. How would you feel if this was not included in the product? And what was great is when you got the feedback from both directions, it allowed you to be able to organize the data so that you could say this specific feature is exciting to the user. It isn't necessarily something they have to have, but they thought it would be really, really cool. And so they might be more likely to buy the product if it's in there. You know, if it's questionable, if we just need to do more research around it, if it's a must-have, if they don't care. And then every now and then you would have a reverse, a feature that if you actually put it into the product, the user does not like it. And sometimes that piece of information is a gem. It'll be the one thing that the team really, really, really wants to implement, and you know that the user not only doesn't want it, but they really, really, really don't want it, that this is something that's going to hurt them potentially in their interaction with the product. It's going to make it significantly more complicated, even though you think it gives them more freedom. The user is thinking, oh my gosh, this is so many more steps. I don't want to deal with this. And you know, such as when you make things sometimes too customizable. And so being able to show them when you when you have a questionnaire like this, you can send it, you can fill it out online and send it to hundreds of users, and being able to say, users for your product. That can be huge when you have a team like this that's just really wanting to go through and implement the coolest features possible to look nice. Okay, so another one. And every company tends to have this, it seems. It's the ghost team. And especially when you're on the UX team, you always hear about, and you're not assigned to all the teams, but you hear about these teams in the company that they kind of are off in an office in the corner and they work on their own all the time. They don't come to UX unless they absolutely have to. And when they do, they you know, it's kind of like, oh, well, we did this thing, we've already built it all, and we want to stamp. We want to say that you saw what we did. But really, oh, my video froze. Okay, there it goes. Sorry, I appear to be having some Wi-Fi issues in the house. It's an old house. Thick walls, so sometimes data goes crazy. But anyways, the ghost team. Yeah, they're hiding over in their area of the building. You don't know what they're up to, but you know that at some point they're just going to drop in your office and say, hey, we built this big amazing thing and we need you to say it's okay. They just really, they're very secretive, basically. And because they're the ghosts, they like to plan the Halloween party. So the best thing I found with these teams is to bribe them. And there's multiple ways that you can do that. In one company, we started webinars within the company. And it was a way, once a month, we would highlight a piece of research that we were doing, a new greenfield project, a new feature that someone was working on, a team that did a redesign and their usage numbers went through the roof. And we would talk about the product, everybody on the team that was involved, what UX research went into it. We always included that, and because it was coming out of the UX team, you know, what did we do to help the team achieve their goals? And these webinars would be posted where people could find them later. And it turned out that a lot of the higher ups in the company would listen to them because it was a good way for them to see different things that are going on in the company from a different point of view. And basically the ghost team started coming to us saying, I want that. we've been working on this really cool thing and we want you to show the whole company what we're doing. And so they started coming to us sooner because we would tell them, well, we can't put you on our webinar if we haven't done any work with you because we don't know what you're doing, and we can't illustrate what we've done with your team if we've not been part of your team. And so they started pulling us in sooner for things just so that they could get in on the webinars, because being on the webinars meant people in the company were talking about them. And even though they were kind of hiding, they still were very proud of their work and they wanted everybody to know what they were doing. The webinars were a lot of work, but they were great at converting all kinds of people in the company. It really helped them understand what it was we did, and it gave them another outlet to try to get the kudos they wanted for the hard work they put into the products that they love so much. Additionally, we did more silly methods of get them over to our office. When I first joined one of my companies, I made a friend, and I noticed that she always had people in her office talking to her. And I would say, how did you get them to come over here? Because I've been trying to get in touch with that person for ages and they're always busy. And she giggled. She said, I'll tell you my secret. She said, everybody in the company knows I have brownies every Friday. And so every Friday, people would go get their coffee and they would wander into her office to get a little brownie to go with their coffee. And while they were in there, they would chat. And she would get the ins and outs of everything that was going on in the company. She knew what teams were working on what, when she might be called in to do different things. And all because of brownies. She said it was the best icebreaker she had to find out what was happening from all these people who weren't social enough to let her know what was going on in their products. So brownies, magic of brownies. Hopefully I didn't go too fast. I did pretty good, I think, time-wise. Anybody have any questions? I know it's not as technical as a lot of the presentations, but it's it's just little tricks. And sometimes the little tricks are all you need to make your life easier on a team. Hello?
Oh yes, thank you so far for your presentation.
Mm-hmm.
You are online still. Maybe some questions from the audience?
No questions?
Oh, visually not.
Oh my goodness.
By Nadia Schmidt in the comment section.
Oh, I see in the chats. Thank you. Haha. So a lot of times the teams that I worked with, because I was mainly on the UX team, we would talk amongst ourselves about the different products and what their teams were like. So you kind of had an idea of how they were going to interact with you. And you hear a lot through rumors in the company about different teams. Otherwise, it's just a matter of hopping in there and observing. I mean, when you go work with a team, look at them like a user, like you're doing an observation session with your users. Watch them, see how they interact. Give them bits of information and see how they react to it. Are they going to fight it? Are they going to say, oh yes, that's wonderful, and then you realize they're not actually going to do anything with it in the product? These things, it's not like you can know unless you actually have had someone who knows the team or you've had experience with that team before. A lot of times it's just a matter of learning over time. None of these things work immediately. It's all about building a relationship. And when you go into the team, the first products might not go the way you hope it's going to go, the first release. But as you work with them and you figure out their quirks and you see what tricks work with them, every release after that becomes easier and easier and easier, and they learn to trust you more and more. It's more about the long game. It's a little trickier with consulting because you don't always have the long-term interaction with the team. And so then you really got to just jump on it. And I just start throwing out all the tricks and seeing which one sticks. Because then it really is about just trying to get as much in as possible. But the difference is when you're coming as a consultant, because they're paying for you, typically they're more willing to take the advice than when you're in a huge company and the team's already there and it's already been, they've been working together for ages and it's almost like you're pushing your way in.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
This answers my question.
Cool.
Thanks.
Any other questions?
No, thank you. Okay. If developers love their products, how do you manage to give? So one question is, if developers love their products, how do you manage to give critical feedback and what goes down well? You know, a spoonful of sugar. With every report that I give, I always start with the positives. And then I talk about things that can be changed and then give solutions for everything that can be changed and that should be changed or needs more work. And then I end on a positive note. I've seen UX developers go into teams and basically tell them everything you're doing is wrong. You've got all these problems. You need to fix all these things. And the initial reaction from the team, especially the developers, is to push back. It's like you have this baby and someone comes in and says, I don't like that outfit you put on the baby. You should cut your baby's hair. You chose the wrong name. And everybody becomes very protective over their baby. But if you show them that you see and you appreciate the good things that they've actually done, and you praise them for those things that they did well. I mean, everything, no matter how crazy an interface is, there's got to be at least one good thing about it, one thing that you can say, even if the feedback isn't about the product, even if the feedback is, I can see that you worked so hard on this. You put all your love into this product, that you've come together as a team and you put these things together. Let's see what we can do as a team. I want to help you make it even better. Let me tell you what users are saying, which parts of the product are making their lives a little bit more difficult. And start with the things that you think that you can make some progress on. So if there's something they admit, like, yeah, I know this part of the product is a little bit goofy, then basically jump on that part. Okay, they've given you an opening. This is the part they're willing to change. So let's change it together. Let's let them see what it's like to work with you, what it's like to get the user data. And then maybe after you have a win there, they're going to open you up to the rest of the product and let you do things. Nobody likes to be told that everything is broken. And when you do that, it'll make all future interactions so hard. And it's just, it takes a lot longer to woo the team, but think of it like a romance. You're flirting with them. You're showing them these little things, dangling these bits that it's like, hey, see this little piece of chocolate over here? Don't you want this little piece of chocolate? You know, anything to make them warm up to you and just accept you as part of the team, basically.
Thank you very much, Tammie. It's helpful.